Hi, everyone. Welcome to our voter participation workshop, playing the infinite game for the Georgia runoff elections. Really glad folks decided to come join us tonight. We have a very exciting program ahead of us. My name is Paula. I am with the Organization for Freedoms, and I help to manage nonprofit and community partnerships there. We're really excited to be partnered with the Whitaker Group and Be Social for tonight's programming. And I'm joined here by my wonderful colleague, Kiara.
Hello. Yes, so I also work with Four Freedoms. I'll be helping to co-facilitate this workshop as well.
Yeah, so I just have like very quickly a few housekeeping type admin items to go over before we jump in and get started. And thanks everyone for your patience as we just waited for folks to join in. The first thing is that you'll notice in the top left-hand corner, we are recording this. It really helps us to improve for future workshops and also share out what comes of and the creativity that we're able to make together. Second thing is that we do understand that our world is mobile. So if you're in like a place with background noise, we just ask that you mute so that we can ensure things run as smoothly as possible. That being said, we would also love to see everyone's beautiful faces so that we can make this as participatory as possible. We've got like a smaller, more intimate group tonight, so this can be more of a conversation. No pressure, obviously, but we would love to see you and have you join in on the fun. And lastly, if you have any questions, you could drop them in the chat. We'll have someone monitoring that and we'll make sure your question gets addressed by the end of the program. We're also doing a participatory creative exercise tonight. So it would help if you have pen and paper nearby or somewhere you can jot down ideas or sketch things out. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. Okay, so what we're talking about here tonight is voter participation, and we have a couple of goals in mind for tonight. The main thing that I'm hoping that folks take away is that they feel better equipped to participate in the upcoming Georgia runoff election. So whether you're someone who lives in Georgia or someone who knows people who live there and want to sort of articulate how important it is, we're hoping that you leave this workshop with all the information that you need and different tools that you can use to get that objective across. And so the first half of the workshop is going to focus on different motivations, ways to kind of use creativity to get people excited and inspired about this kind of civic participation. And then the latter half of the workshop is going to have all the information you need. So specific info that if you want to participate in the Georgia elections, all the different sort of rules that you might need to know to be able to do so effectively. So this workshop is called Playing the Infinite Game. And I want to talk about what that means a little bit and what it means to me. This workshop and this fall is a part of a campaign Four Freedoms is running called the 2020 Awakening Campaign. And it's really rooted in this idea of game theory. And game theory states that there's two kinds of games that you can play. There are finite games and there are infinite games. Finite games are ones where there are definitive winners and losers. It's played within a specific time frame, and they're finite. They're ending. But infinite games, the objective of the game is to keep the game going. And so we've been sort of thinking about the election and about participating in democracy in that way as an infinite game. The federal election happened on November 3rd, and not but a few days later, a winner was announced. And so there's the finite aspect of it. But we definitely want to acknowledge that the work is not over. And the Georgia runoff elections is a perfect illustration of that. We really want to keep the energy and the inspiration and the joy really from the federal election that was felt, and harness it and put it towards this next upcoming important election. So every game has rules, and I'd love to talk about the rules of the infinite game we're playing. You'll see them here on the screen. Does anyone want to read a rule that jumps out at them, that they notice that they connect with in any way?
I like number 2 personally.
Can you read it?
There are no gatekeepers. Bring people into play. Be where you are and carry your own trash.
Thank you.
I'll read one. I like rule number 1. No one plays alone. You know nothing you need to know, and the rules always change. Love overrules.
I've always liked 3. Learn from feeling. Let love quiet fear. Nourish joy. Go there. Does anyone want to read number 4?
You're just in time. Leap before you look. You know everything you need to know. Together we are awake.
Thank you, everyone. And seriously, don't take yourself too seriously.
Great. Okay. So basically, one part of the slides that we like to kind of sit on is address why we're here, why we're in this space, what made us feel like we need to be here at this specific workshop. And why I like this is that it kind of ties it back around to the rules. Oh no, you're good. Don't worry. It ties back around to the rules. So these are the reasons why, like at Four Freedoms, and why we find this really important, but also like in the larger scheme of things, what do they mean beyond the rules? So together we are awake. 2020 raised the stakes. We saw a record turnout that turned Georgia blue for the first time since 1992. Now we have the chance to win the US Senate seats that will pave the way for this new administration to effect real change. The next one is, we are the ones we've been waiting for. When people participate in our democracy, the candidates that support people win. We want to capitalize on the momentum of 2020 and highlight the importance of this time in the history of our democracy. We are voting, engaging others about civic participation, and playing the infinite game. And the last one is, the rules change. Voting rules are hard. Many people don't vote because the rules are confusing and constantly changing. And I like ending on that one just because it just validates that voting is really hard. A lot of people who are they're shy, they don't want to be involved, or they just don't think that the system actually helps them. This kind of validates that like there's systems and rules in play and different things that kind of keep certain people inside of government, inside of trying to participate, and outside. So just kind of validates people's feelings, which I think is really important.
Okay, so another thing that's really important to consider when finding reasons to to get to the polls and participate is motivation. And everyone has different motivations as to why they might want to or why they might not want to vote. So does anyone want to share like an issue that's important to them, or a reason they might be voting this election season? If not, that's totally okay too. On the screen, you'll see some examples of artwork that's been made, designed some by For Freedom's artists, some not. But it really just goes to show you how art can be used as a potential tool of inspiration, and really act as the catalyst that makes people want to get involved. And voting is just one action you can take. There's plenty of ways to be sort of an active and engaged person in the political realm, but voting is definitely a direct way you can participate in that. These are just some more examples of different artwork that folks have made. You'll see here a portrait of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, followed by this freedom of worship, which was definitely an integral image to Four Freedoms. It is a transformation of an original Norman Rockwell photo that was remade to sort of demonstrate, an updated version of what America could look like, since he was really focused on portraying Americans and American life. I'm going to stop screen sharing for 1 minute, and we'll have just a brief interlude. I'm going to put folks into breakout rooms for 1 second if you want to have like a more personal conversation about voting, why you're here today, and why it's important to you. Kiara, do you think you could break folks out? Keaton and Sam?
Yes, let me do that. Hold on. Oh, I think that Elliot, you might have to do it on your end for the host, because I don't think as co-host we can do breakout rooms.
All right, 1 second. I'm actually going to give you, Kiara, the capabilities. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Amazing. Okay, give me 1 second. Wait, okay, so I just put everyone in a waiting room. Can we pause for a second?
I'm sorry that this seems a little bit like disjointed. We've been sort of sidebarring in the chat, if that's any like reason why we might seem a little bit off track or distracted. Basically, I don't know, Veronica, if you want to explain what you've been.
Yeah, all right. So I'm sorry to like put you guys on the spot and send you these crazy messages. I'm positive that while you're presenting, seeing these messages is not making it
Spread the good word.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm gonna continue sharing my screen so we could jump back into the workshop. Thanks everyone for your patience with us. And we're gonna move right on to the next slide.
Great. So again, kind of like going off of that last part where we were like, why are we here? And we're talking about the rules changing and it being hard for just to vote in general. This slide also acknowledges that like voting is hard and there's certain things that are put in place that make it hard. So this says disenfranchisement is real. There is a reason that roughly 40 to 45% of Americans usually don't vote. Voter suppression is real. Every state has laws that make it more difficult to participate, including Georgia. Our goal is to heal the relationship between citizens and policymakers by increasing connection and participation. It's not always easy, but it's always important.
So going back to the rules of the infinite game, one of which is to bring people into play. And so if you're feeling like you're an informed and equipped voter, then it's also really important to bring others and empower them to do the same. And it can be hard sometimes to like demonstrate to people why voting is important. And there's definitely um, a lot of mixed feelings around voting and how, like Kiara said, because of disenfranchisement, people are really apathetic towards the process. So these are just a couple of ways and strategies that we have outlined that could potentially help with that. The first is to insist on the future. So when you participate in the political process, just make sure you're staying as authentic as possible. Some of the exercises that we were talking about more in the beginning of the workshop, thinking about personal motivations and also different artwork that can inspire folks to get involved. Definitely use examples that are authentic to you and the care that you have or the reasons that you have for voting, whether that be to improve your community or because you believe in a specific person or candidate, that's definitely going to come through. The second is to bridge binaries, encourage others to participate come January 5th, which is when the election is, and be visionary and not reactionary. And so everyone has their own sort of political views as to, issues that they stand on, parties that they feel aligned with. I think the most important thing is that people exercise their right to vote. And so, working against things like voter suppression, which historically we've seen a lot of in Georgia, to me, it's most important that everyone has their voice heard. And although I have my personal politics and candidates that I want to see succeed, when, I don't want to isolate anyone when I'm trying to make them feel like their voice matters. And so instead of aligning or talking about any one specific person or idea, we would suggest bridging those binaries and having a conversation with someone, really hearing them out. The third is to nourish joy. So you can think of voting as this obligation, right? It's often described as a duty, your civic duty you must do. It's a responsibility that we have to uphold. But if you sort of spin that and turn voting into this really fun and joyful act, this way to step into your own power, it's actually way more fun than that. And so by volunteering and staying informed and using your voice and thinking about voting and other kinds of democratic participation as something that's filled with joy, it definitely makes it easier. The next is just to listen until we hear. So when you engage with voters, really hear them out. And this kind of goes back to bridge binaries. Like, you could have a conversation with someone and not necessarily agree with what they think about, but it's important, if you're telling someone that their voice matters, to actually listen to them. And then the last is to provoke bigger questions. So 2020 was more than just about the presidential election. And this race, the Georgia runoff race, really illustrates that. We're looking at an election that's going to determine who has the majority in the Senate. And so, it's coming down to more than just who's going to be living in the White House. And this is really a perfect opportunity for us to keep with this momentum that we found and really continue participating in a way that's meaningful.
Yeah, so this time around, we included this civic joy slide in our presentation. And this is kind of like the heart of our campaign and what we've been moving forward with, which is kind of how we define it on this presentation is civic joy is a way to harness creativity and be inspired rather than bogged down by the democratic process. Civic engagement can be a joyful and creative act. And so we've started to look at, like, how can you not think of civic engagement as something that's kind of like a burden or something that doesn't feel like it's for you? How can you look at the joyful things and the ways that creativity can be participation? How can you creating something also speak to like changing something or like moving towards something, and how can it facilitate and move forward with this like infinite game? How can you stay involved, and how do you already do that in your own community? And so these are some pictures by Sheila Pretty Bright, who is actually a Georgia-based artist, kind of looking at the American flag. And this is like another way of being civically engaged and invoking civic joy, is creating these photos and making conversation. And some examples that we also link to are Joy to the Polls, which is an organization that, it kind of basically like gathers like celebrities and artists and musicians and all these different things that make people happy and bring people joy, and put them in places that are polling places or places that basically are civic participation spaces. And how can we make those spaces fun? How can we make voting fun again? And then we also linked to a few other TikTok activists who use their platforms and use content to be created to make a difference and put their voice into a conversation.
Thanks, Kiara. And so I'll briefly talk about One for Freedom's one part of the campaign, which is the Billboard campaign, and how it's sort of like an in-person version of something that might be equivalent to what you would see digitally with what Kiara was just talking about with different online activists and online spaces, just like in terms of impressions. So one of the projects that For Freedoms works on are billboards, and sort of it's going off of this idea that if artists and creative people were given the same space that is like traditionally occupied by politicians or that are like commercial spaces, maybe we could get folks to think more creatively, more critically about the civic process. So on the screen, you'll see some examples. This time around, for the billboard aspect of the 2020 Awakening, a lot of artists asked different questions. And so this one by Mohsin Mohi Uddin asks, America, me greater than we, me greater than or less than me equals me. And so we're going to keep moving forward in the interest of time, but we'd encourage folks that are joining us tonight to maybe think about what type of question they would put on a billboard, and just get into the practice of using that creative energy and harnessing it towards a greater purpose, and use it to get people excited.
Yeah, so we also included this slide talking about newly eligible voters, and seeing like that there's this, so I feel like this slide is super important, because when you're younger, you feel like you're like not able to like really make that much of a difference, and like you're about to like kind of step into this voting role, and it's not an election, it's not based on an election. But this is something that's really awesome and really cool, is that there's going to be all these new eligible voters who are going to be able to vote and to make a difference in these Georgia runoffs, which is this huge big thing, and this huge thing that's following this historical change of like Georgia turning blue. So this slide says 23,000 17-year-olds that were ineligible to vote in the 2020 election will be legally able to vote in the Georgia runoffs. In 2020, Georgia voters aged 18 to 29 made up 21% of all votes cast in the state. That is 4% higher than the national average. Younger Georgians overwhelmingly voted for President-elect Biden over President Trump at 57% to 39%, which is like a huge gap, and shows like the amount of voting power and the amount that people's votes do actually matter.
Definitely. And so in this next part of the presentation, we're going to be talking about specific tools that you can use to spread civic joy, to get people more invested in getting to the polls. And this is where we're going to be giving all the informational aspects about everything that you need to make sure that you can vote this election. And just as a reminder too, we'll send around this presentation afterwards so that you have all this compiled into one place, because it is a lot of information at once. So different tools that you can use to spread civic joy. You can phone or text bank. And so, you know, just by sending around different messages, calling people on the phone that you know in Georgia. There's some examples of messages here that you could use, text or calling on the screen. You know, different ways that you can remind people of upcoming deadlines or of what you think and who you're voting for and why you think it's important. And these same principles can be applied to any different platform that you use. You could send someone a message on Snapchat and just ask them, hey, do you want to come and vote with me? You could DM someone on Instagram or make a video of you registering to vote and just kind of showing why it's important to you and actually how the process can be a simple one and a fun one.
Yeah, so as we said before, this is about to be a lot of information. So if whatever piece of paper that you grabbed, you can like write it down. I'm telling you, it's going to be a lot. Okay, so one, why is there a runoff and when is it? So Georgia requires a candidate receive at least 50% of the vote to win an election. To Senate candidate, no Senate candidate in either 2020 race obtained 50% of the vote. The top two candidates are headed for a runoff. And this election is scheduled, as we've been saying in the past few slides, that it's scheduled for January 5th, 2021. So the registration deadline, it's due, the deadline is December 7th, and you can register by mail, online, or in person. And citizens that will be 18 years old of age, like we were saying before, on or before January 5th can also register to vote, so that like newly eligible voting group will be able to vote if you're 18 before or on January 5th. Then ID requirements to register. To register in person, you will need either a Georgia's driver's license, a state issued ID card number, or the last four digits of your social security number. And so then if you register by mail with no ID, then you'll need a photo ID or one of these documents or another government document with your name and your address when you actually vote, when you show up to vote. ID requirements to vote in person. You must show one of these forms of ID that it lists here. So it says valid state or federally issued photo ID, Georgia's driver's license, a student ID that I think it's like for most 2 or 4 year colleges, a valid government employee ID, a valid passport, a military ID, or a tribal photo ID. And then if you don't have an ID, then you can vote for a provisional ballot, so kind of hold your vote, and then you'll be able to show up with an actual accepted form of ID 3 days, up until 3 days before it will just be void if you don't show up with an actual ID.
So one of the ways you can vote, obviously, that we've been talking about is by mail. So obviously this time around with the pandemic, with you know, a lot of state sanctioned violence, a lot of people won't feel comfortable going to the polls. And so there's this option of voting by mail. It does require a little bit more preparation than just showing up on the 5th. But for folks who don't feel safe going in person, there's this option for you. So the first thing to know is that you can request a ballot a couple different ways. You can do so online, which is an amazing feature, by mail, by fax, if anyone still has a fax machine, or in person, and you can do so at your local county board of elections. And you don't need an excuse to vote by mail, whereas you know, in other vote by mail processes, you have to submit a reason for, you know, either you're going to be out of the country or just not there. Anyone can vote by mail this time around. An important deadline to know is that you can request a ballot to vote by mail by December 31st. So just keep that in mind. The next thing that you should know is to fill out your ballot with blue or black ink. You could sort of think about it like a Scantron or an SAT test, just making sure you fill out the bubbles all the way to make sure your vote is counted. Don't forget to sign inside the envelope. This is gonna validate your ballot. Check for correct postage. So one of the annoying things about this option of voting is that you need to make sure you have enough postage to get your ballot to where it's going to go. And you'll need more than one forever stamp if your ballot happens to be a little bit heavier. So you can return your ballot by mail. And if you do that, you need the correct postage, or you could just drop it off to any USPS mailbox. But it does need to be received by 7 o'clock on January 5th. And you can check your local election official for where an appropriate location is if you don't know. And then you can track your ballot to make sure that it gets where it's going. So you can track your ballot by contacting your local election official or online on the Secretary of State's website.
Okay, so this slide speaks to early voting. So Georgia does offer early voting. The early voting period in Georgia begins on December 14th, 2020. This period will last for 16 days. Locations and hours of operation may vary, so you should kind of just like look into it and be really specific before you go. And so then another big part that always should be like stressed is that your early voting location and your like just regular election day polling location are two different places. They're most likely to not be the same place. So just be sure to confirm your early voting location and the hours of operation with the actual local election day location. Then also you should bring your ID, even if you don't think it's required, like even if like in the past you've gone to vote and they are like they've never asked you for ID, it doesn't matter. Just kind of like putting your ID in your bag and like making sure that you have it is kind of like this fail proof like plan that you can just kind of make sure that you're gonna vote with your ID. Then the next one is be safe, wear a mask, social distance, and sanitize before and after. And just like, yeah, keep in mind that COVID is still happening. It's still a thing. So just keep that in mind. Follow the rules. Don't wear political attire to vote, and don't take a selfie with your ballot. That is actually illegal, which I didn't even know until I started doing these workshops. If you take a selfie with your ballot, that's just like your vote is void, and that's it. Which is a very interesting rule, but it's also very helpful. Only use blue or black ink, no other colored ink. Follow any directions given to you by your election workers. Take time and double check your ballot. And you can always ask for a new one if you make a mistake. So never be like really nervous that you didn't fill out something correctly, because you can always ask someone a question, or you can always get another ballot. And then be ready to wait. We are already seeing voters having to wait, and you've seen that in the presidential election of like the long lines and people being very proactive and trying to get there at certain times. But just be prepared, have a snack, bring a friend, wear comfortable shoes, just kind of like you're going to like a cute picnic with your friends. That's how I would describe it.
So the next slide is about voter intimidation, and it was briefly described in our last slide. Certain forms of voter intimidation actually include wearing like specific merchandise that promotes a specific candidate. So what is voter intimidation? That's an example of one. It's threatening, coercing, or scaring any other person for the purpose of interfering with the right of that person to vote or vote as they may choose. So because this is a really high stakes election, as the presidential election was, you might unfortunately see some people, you know, engaging in threatening behavior and attempting to strip people of their right to cast their vote and cast it for whoever they want. So different examples of this include falsely identifying yourself as an election official or spreading false information. That's one of the things that we're trying to combat here tonight, is making sure you have all the info you need in case someone is there trying to suppress the vote or misinform people. And it's a really serious offense and charge. You can face up to a year in prison or some pretty serious fines. So if you see any kind of voter intimidation, you can alert a poll worker and just give a clear account of what you've seen. And de-escalating the situation, you wouldn't want to do that yourself. So don't try and take matters into your own hands, but just find the appropriate person and just let them know what's going on. And if the poll workers aren't helping, you can always call the election protection hotline at 1-866-OUR-VOTE. And that's a nonpartisan coalition of folks, which with also a Spanish speaking line. And so they'll be there to help you and to help figure out what's happening at that polling location and make sure that everyone has their chance to cast their vote how they want.
So this is we're coming towards the end of our workshop, and we're not going to go through this entire map, but this is just kind of an example of having a plan. And having a plan to go vote, it actually shows that people are more likely to actually go vote if they have designated the plan and they kind of map this out. So whether this looks like you're setting like an event on your calendar and like finding your polling station and knowing that you're going there at a specific time, kind of setting it like an appointment, or like an event on your schedule, you are more likely to actually go cast your ballot. So this is just an example of someone planning and mapping out what they would do on that day.
Great. So thank you everyone for joining tonight. Like we said, we know that was a lot of information towards the end there. So we'll make sure to follow up with the deck so you have access to all the one-pagers and also the examples that we linked in there of different ways people are using their creativity to inspire others. I think we will be having another voter participation workshop. So feel free to come hang out with us again if anything was sort of unclear or if you want to tell your friends about it. But we're so happy that you all joined tonight, and you can get more information by emailing me. I'll drop my email in the chat, and you can also follow For Freedoms on Instagram for updates on what we're doing and the campaign and other ways you can get involved.
Yeah, it was nice seeing you all. Oh yeah, I'll put my email in the chat too. If you have any questions, just let us know. And it was nice seeing you. Hopefully see you again. Bye everyone.
Thank you, ladies. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks, ladies.